Good morning and welcome. We're continuing in our Easter series for Black Rock Baptist Church, and this is number 3 in the series. And of course, this is Palm Sunday, and I want to talk to you this morning about an appointment in Jerusalem. Well, this is Holy Week, and all around the world, Christians are celebrating the events that took place some 2,000 years ago. And although there are many things that separate us, this is one thing that all Christians agree upon. Holy Week is the center of the Christian faith. For one glorious week, differences of language and culture and race and doctrine are forgotten. And what a week it is. 8 days that begin with Palm Sunday and culminate with Easter Sunday, 2 great events that bracket Holy Week, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and the resurrection of Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday. It's called Holy Week because it encompasses some of the most sacred events of the Christian faith. All the things that we hold most dear were proved to be true during this great week in the city of Jerusalem. This morning, our focus is on Palm Sunday, and of all of the events of Holy Week, the triumphal entry is the most overlooked and I think the least understood of these events. I'm sure that most of us know the general outline of the story, but I suspect that most of us have never really considered the story in great detail. Why did Jesus ride into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey? Why did people wave palm branches? Why did they cry out Hosanna as he passed by? What does all of that mean? On Palm Sunday, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, and although the crowds cheered, beneath the surface a conflict was raging. The day began, as all other days, with an early sunrise and the sound of merchants opening their little shops. Bethany wasn't a very large town, or even a town at all, more like a village, really a simple cluster of homes. Here and there, the farmers made ready to go to the fields. Planting season was upon them. Mothers busied themselves with getting their children dressed and ready for the day. But in one home, things were different because Jesus was there, and it was the home of Mary and Martha, 2 sisters who lived together along with their brother Lazarus. Jesus had visited them many times. Their home was a special place of refuge for Jesus. But this time, his visit had been different. This time, he had come for a funeral, but it turned into a celebration. Just a day or 2 earlier, he had publicly raised Lazarus from the dead. Hundreds of people had seen him do that. And now thousands more had heard about the news. It seemed so impossible, but Jesus had done it. The celebration had gone late into the night, and now the next morning has come. It was clear to everyone that Jesus was not staying there any longer. He was a man on a mission. No one else knew what was about to happen. No one, not even the most perceptive of the disciples, realized what was about to happen on this cloudless Sunday morning. I pause here to insert 2 facts about the narrative. One is that the story of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem is repeated in detail in all 4 gospel writers. That fact is noteworthy because it tells us that something critical is about to happen, something very important. The other fact is that as you read the story, one impression overwhelms you. Jesus is in complete control of everything that is happening on Palm Sunday. Unlike other events in his life, he is not reacting to anyone or anything else. No one, repeat, no one expects him to do what he does. There's no sick people to heal here. There's no Pharisees to confront, no storms to still, no dead men to raise, no puzzling questions to answer. What Jesus does, he does of his own accord. The story of Palm Sunday really begins with a donkey. Most of us have heard how Jesus sent his disciples to a neighboring village, probably Bethany, with the instructions to bring back a donkey. When you read Matthew's account, you realize that the two disciples actually brought back two donkeys, a mother and her young colt, which had never been ridden. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on the young colt with the mother walking alongside. Matthew also tells us that by riding on a donkey into Jerusalem, Jesus was fulfilling an ancient prophecy. A prophecy from Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 9. These words were written 575 years earlier. And they predicted that when the Messiah comes to Israel, he will come riding on a donkey. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey. Nothing would have seemed more unlikely than for a king to come riding on a donkey. Jesus could hardly have chosen a more unlikely way to present himself to the nation. If the scriptures had not predicted it, no one would have dreamed it up. And that explains why the Romans sat idly by on Palm Sunday, while thousands of people flocked to Jesus. From their point of view, this whole thing is a joke. A king on a donkey? You must be kidding. No self-respecting king would be caught dead on a donkey. If you wanted to make an impact, you would come riding on a war horse or surrounded by soldiers or mounted on a chariot. But on a donkey? No way. It's not hard to imagine the Romans laughing as they watched this spectacle. A pauper king riding on a borrowed donkey. His saddle of makeshift layers of cloaks. Attended by an unruly mob whose only weapons are palm branches. He didn't look much like a king that day. But that was the whole point. He's a king, but he's not like any earthly king. The triumphal entry was an acted-out parable in which Jesus was sending a very clear message to the nation. This is what I am. I am your king, but I'm not the king you were expecting. Speaking of the unexpected, as Jesus began the 3-mile journey from Bethany to Jerusalem, the people along the road began to do something that no one could ever have predicted. As Jesus passed by, they waved palm branches. What's with that? What does it mean? Well, back in the Old Testament, the Jews were told to wave palm branches as part of the Feast of Tabernacles. 200 years before, during the Maccabean rebellion, when the Jews temporarily gained control of the temple from the Syrians, they celebrated by waving palm branches. 30 years after the death of Christ, during the rebellion that led to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, the Jews minted coins containing an image of palm branches on one side. Taking all this together, we may say that in the time of Christ, palm branches represented joy and celebration. Waving palm branches before Jesus was similar to a ticker tape parade today. When Jesus waved, or when the Jews waved the palm branches, as Jesus rode by, they were in effect saying, "This is the man, and this is the day." It was the welcome given to kings and conquerors. Well, it's now Sunday morning, 5 days before Passover. That fact is significant because it means that Jerusalem will be filled with pilgrims who are coming from every part of Israel for the great celebration. Josephus says that during the Passover, the population of Jerusalem would swell to about 3 million people. Everyone who was anyone showed up for Passover. Long forgotten friends would meet in the streets. Families would travel hundreds of miles just to be there. In such a festive atmosphere, rumors quickly spread like wildfire. As word of the raising of Lazarus spread, people began to wonder if Jesus would come to Jerusalem for Passover. Everyone knew the animosity that existed between Jesus and the temple leaders. Would he take a chance and come to Jerusalem anyway? Or would Jesus play it safe and stay away altogether? Just picture the scene here. As Jesus leaves Bethany for Bethphage and the Mount of Olives, hundreds of people came running to join him. Soon the crowd swells as whole families drop what they're doing and line the narrow dirt road. If you read John's account, it's clear that another large crowd in Jerusalem, having heard that Jesus was on his way, they leave the city and come out to meet Jesus as he approaches the Mount of Olives. Somewhere on the far side of the Kidron Valley, the two groups join in a melee of shouting and singing and laughing and dancing and chanting. It's a day of unbridled joy as the common people welcome Jesus to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, inside the city, the chief priests and the scribes monitor the situation with increasing alarm. A public display of support for Jesus was the last thing they wanted to see, and it appears that the entire world has gone over to Jesus' side. Their shock turns to dismay and then to anger as the reports come pouring in. The minutes turn to hours on Palm Sunday while two streams of human emotion converge. On one hand, there's the rising excitement as Jesus nears the eastern gate of the city. On the other hand, there's the mounting opposition as the leaders decide that Jesus is not going to leave this city alive. Meanwhile, the procession makes its way toward Jerusalem. The shouts of the people are growing louder by the minute. All four gospel writers make a point not only to mention that the people shouted, but that they specifically mentioned two things. First, they cried out, "Hosanna! Hosanna, Hosanna." And second, they said, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Hosanna is a Hebrew word meaning "save us now." Every observant Jew would immediately recognize the second statement as a quotation from Psalm 118. They all knew it because Psalm 118 was the best known of the messianic psalms. By shouting those words, the people were in effect emphatically identifying Jesus as the Messiah. No other meaning could reasonably be considered from their shouts. These people believed that at long last the Messiah had come, and they were right. Sometimes it is overlooked that Jesus gladly accepted the praise of the people on Palm Sunday, because, what a change that was. For most of his public ministry, whenever he worked a miracle, he told the people not to say anything about it. Don't spread the word. He wanted people to see him as more than just a miracle worker. But not today, not Palm Sunday. The time for silence is long past. If he once discouraged publicity, he now counts silence as inconceivable. The time for the truth has come. When the Pharisees heard the crowds praising him, they urged him to rebuke his disciples. Jesus refused. He said, if I tell them to be quiet, the rocks themselves will break forth in praise to me. And now something very strange happens. Luke is the only writer who tells us about this. At the height of the celebration, Jesus begins to weep. It happened as the road to Jerusalem wound around the southern shoulder of the Mount of Olives, and as you travel that road, you come to the crest of a small rise. And as you reach the crest, the whole city of Jerusalem appears before your eyes. It's a breathtaking sight. When Jesus saw the city, he begins to weep. It must have seemed strange. I can imagine a little boy saying, Mommy, why is Mr. Jesus crying? And the answer, I don't know, sweetheart. The answer is not hard to find. Jesus was weeping not for himself, but for the city that was about to reject him. Jesus saw beyond the cheering crowds to the mob that would soon crucify him. He knew on Palm Sunday that Good Friday was only 5 days away. And through the dim mist of history, he saw into the future, to the time when the Roman army would destroy Jerusalem in AD 70. These are his words. If you, even you, had known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The day will come when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within your walls. They will not leave one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Luke chapter 19, verse 42 and following. In the midst of the joy, Jesus saw the future very clearly. He knew that Good Friday was only 5 days away. He knew that the nation would soon turn away from him. He also saw that the day would come when the Romans would destroy the city stone by stone, killing men and women and children by the thousands. Because the nation would reject its Messiah, such awful judgment would soon fall. Why? Well, God's Son had come and they did not recognize him. God's Son had come and they crucified him. He knew the crowds were fickle. He knew the leaders were plotting against him. He knew the cheers would soon turn to jeers. He knew that on Palm Sunday, he knew then what would happen on Good Friday. He knew the cross lay directly in his path. He knew that all the things that went on that day, and he went to Jerusalem anyway. He knew all about those things. King Jesus rode toward the city because he had an appointment in Jerusalem. In the days to come, some would look back and say, if only we had known. But on Palm Sunday, no one could truly use that excuse. They knew. No one could ever say he didn't make himself plain. How could he have made it any plainer? He made himself so clear that no one could miss it. On Palm Sunday, the nation of Israel had a clear choice to make, and so did the rulers. The Romans did nothing to interfere. The priests stood by and watched it all happen. Every man had a choice to make that day. Every man in Jerusalem made a choice. For better or for worse, the die was cast. Jesus called for a decision, and the nation rendered its verdict. Now Jesus has come into the city. Wild confusion reigns. The king has come. What will the people do? The answers are not hard to find. The disciples praise him openly. The children praise him innocently. The crowds cheer him, but they do not understand him. The city is curious, but it's not committed. That leaves only one group, the religious leaders. The large group of scribes and Pharisees, the elders of Israel, the rulers of the Sanhedrin. What will they say? How will they respond? The people have spoken, but will their rulers follow suit? 3 words sum up the official reaction of the religious leaders to Jesus on Palm Sunday. Those words are fright, frustration, and anger. Fright because they did not know what Jesus was up to. Frustration because so many people were cheering him as he rides into the city. And anger because they now see him as an enemy of their interests, an enemy who must be eliminated. My friend Keith Brower, who's a farmer in Wainwright, Alberta, has an expression that he uses to describe anyone who finds themselves in a tight spot. I've heard him say, we're down to the short rows now. That's a figure of speech taken from the way farmers often plow their fields. When you plow diagonally, you start out with the long rows and you end up with the short rows. It takes extra skill to handle the short rows properly. The people of Israel were down to the short rows now. The luxury of idle decision is now past. The time for decision is come. Very soon the nation must render its verdict concerning Jesus. The evidence is in, the jury has been instructed, the verdict must be returned. In Matthew's account, he includes a fascinating note here. As Jesus approached Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, Matthew says that the whole city stirred. That word stirred means to be shaken to the core. People began to ask each other, who is this man? And the answer came back, it's Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. Think about that answer for a moment. It was true as far as it goes. Every detail is correct, but it doesn't go far enough. He is a prophet, but he's more than a prophet. He's from Galilee, but that's not his ultimate hometown. The people of Jerusalem asked the right questions, but gave the almost right answers. But in spiritual things, almost right is not good enough. They were close, but they weren't close enough. The answer he received was not encouraging. Although the crowds cheered, they did not truly understand him. Although the leaders understood him, they did not cheer him. Israel came close, so close that day to embracing him as God's Messiah, but close wasn't good enough. After Palm Sunday, the only thing left was Golgotha. Nearly 20 centuries have passed and gone since Jesus met his appointment in Jerusalem. 3 abiding lessons remain for our consideration. The first one is spiritual opportunities don't last forever. When Jesus, or where Jesus is involved, no one can wait forever. No one can sit on the fence forever. There comes a time when a decision must be made for or against the Son of God. In spiritual matters, not to decide, not to make a decision, is to say, not now. And the answer is really no. Secondly, the world that rejected Christ then still rejects him today. People of the world hate religious emotion in the same way the Pharisees hated the way the crowds cheered Jesus as he rode into Jerusalem. They hate religious emotion because they do not understand it. To them, religion is an intellectual affair that never touches the heart. But Jesus will have none of that. If a man will not give him his heart, Jesus wants no part of him. Although it is strange to say, but if Jesus came to the Annapolis Valley today, he would be crucified all over again. The invitation, thirdly, here, so spiritual opportunities don't last forever. The world rejected Christ then, and it will still reject him today. The invitation, thirdly, is not to believe, but to be brave. Christ comes again and again to the human heart, and each time a verdict must be rendered. Look, he's coming down Main Street. Jesus has come to our town. Your king has come. What will you do? Will you join with those who will crucify him? Or will you join with those who cry out, Hosanna, Hosanna? Our greatest need is to have enough courage to make the right choices. When the time comes to take sides with Jesus, what you need is enough courage to do the right thing. The Palm Sunday invitation is not to believe, but it's an invitation to be brave. The brave join the little children who praise him gladly, while the timid are left to dream about what might have been. God bless. Have a wonderful day, and until we meet again, let's continue to exchange prayers daily.